This is the second part of the presentation, providing background and foundational information about yoga, and hoping to convince you that yoga is the best tool to make the rest of our lives the best of our lives. These are the topics that will be covered in this video, focusing more on the history and philosophy of classical yoga. There will be, as there was in part 1, some yoga poses that we do together. You are welcome to do them at this time or fast forward if you choose not to. But if you do participate, please remember the principles of alignment and make sure you stay in a pain-free range of motion. Sanskrit is the ancient language of India, going back at least 3,500 years. It is the language of yoga in many early Hindu texts as well. It can be compared to Latin in the Western world, being that much important to our history and our understanding. This is what the yogic text would look like in its Sanskrit form. This is a number of poses that are showing both the English name and the Sanskrit name. As you do classes, either in a studio or watching them on videos, there may be teachers that use just the Sanskrit name, just the English name, or a combination of both. You'll hear teachers using things like Adho Mukha Svanasana instead of downward facing dog, or Ustrasana instead of camel pose. But there is no need to memorize those names. You will become sufficiently familiar with them through your practice if they are used in the classes that you take. So looking at classical yoga, the name itself comes from the Sanskrit word for yoke or harness. It is a spiritual discipline, balancing body, mind, and spirit, and harnessing our attention within. Classical yoga is not itself a religion or a property of any religion. As America's yoga practice developed, leaders didn't extract poses from Hindu and Buddhist practices. The evolution was the reverse. Yoga preceded the establishment of these religions. In any yoga class, the individual is not required to believe any dogma. There's no prescribed modes of worship. And many people who practice yoga, regardless of their religious beliefs, feels that the practice of yoga helps them deepen their own faith and spiritual commitment. That they learn to take from yoga what makes sense to them and leave the rest behind. This is a map of the Indus River Valley, where we believe yoga originated, although there is some evidence that it came from the Mideast, maybe down into Africa. But we have evidence from 6,000 years ago about its presence here in this area, the goldish area on the map, superimposed upon a modern map that shows you how it covered areas of Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, China. Over on the right-hand side, there is a steatite that comes from approximately 4000 BCE. This is one of the bits of archaeological evidence that we have that tells us that some yoga poses were performed that early in time. This one is showing a man sitting on a prayer bench. He has his feet joined together at his midline with the knees out to either side, a pose called Baddha Konasana. His hands are resting then on top of his legs, wearing an ornate headdress for reasons unknown. But there are many such artifacts that gives us dating abilities in terms of what poses were practiced in that area. Yoga's history has many places of obscurity and uncertainty because it was transmitted orally. Yoga was passed from a guru, a teacher, to the student. And that student was chosen because of their capability, their worthiness for learning the philosophy. It was a practice that was more often than not reserved for the intellectually elite, not accessible to everyone in the society. It was a closed secret structure, perhaps like the Masons in medieval times or even the Illuminati. And because of that, because of the fact that none of this was written down in its earliest days, some details about its practice and beliefs may have been lost. This timeline gives a chronology of the different periods of yoga and includes many of the most important texts below the white line. On the far left, we see nothing given below that line because we have no historical record. But we know in that time, or assume in that time, that the Vedic worldview was polytheistic, then it moved to monotheism, then non-dualism, which is the one that's most associated with yoga. Non-dualism holds that an individual is one with everything in the universe. As we see below the line, the Vedas are the first of the written documents. The Rig Veda, the first of that set. Its date is controversial by thousands of years, but we know that it was written over an extended period of time. It is a book of hymns, rituals, and like most of those in the yogic genre, poetic, metaphoric, containing much imagery. It is about externals to man, his outer world, the first level of consciousness, about nature and cosmology. Its writers were steeped in yoga, and views in the document evolved as later chapters were written. Underneath that, the Upanishads were one of the most important works in this tradition, and they focused on man's internal world, gave a discussion of spiritual ideas and ideals. This literature is believed to be the core of Hindu non-dualism, and it is one of the first books that is associated with that religion. Starting with the gold boxes underneath, the Mahabharata is an epic poem, the longest known in the world. It may be factual or metaphorical. One of its most beloved components, still read frequently today, is the Bhagavad Gita. It is a dialogue between the warrior Arjuna and his charioteer, Lord Krishna. It talks about action and their significance, love, yoga as it applies to action, yoga as it applies to spirit. The top green box, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, is one of the most definitive books about the practice of yoga as it extends into today, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. On the bottom, we see the box that indicates the birth of Buddha, given variously somewhere a little bit before, a little bit after 500 BCE. Rather than go through the rest of the text and the rest of the periods in yoga, I thought it would be more pertinent to look at the chronology of the major religions of the world. We see, starting with the brown line at the top and then going down through the green lines, all of those that are the Abrahamic religions, the ones that are monotheistic, that they believe in duality, that God is separate from his creation, and all descend from the patriarch Abraham. Judaism is the oldest of these. The Pentateuch was believed to be written about 1300 BCE by Moses. So that is the first of the written documents we have in that religion. We know that Christianity began with the birth of Christ, and we look just after that with Pentecost, the start of Catholicism. As we look down to the lower purplish, pinkish ones, we see the Protestant Reformation, the evolution of Christianity through the many sects there that is still ongoing today. The green begin with the birth of Muhammad, interestingly enough, almost equidistant in the future of Christ as Buddha was in the past. But these are the ones that still have the tradition of Abraham as the father, but believe that Jesus Christ was just one of the major prophets and that Muhammad was the last of the great prophets. So we see that the yogic philosophy is older than any of these religions. Same thing when we look at Hinduism. As I said, started pretty much around the time of the Upanishads, a little before maybe 1500 or 2000 BCE. We see Buddhism then starting with the birth of Buddha, and actually as a religion it did not, because Buddha's original ideas were a way of life rather than a religion, and he did not involve God in his philosophy. Separate from all of these ideas, Confucianism in China, Shintoism in Japan evolved about the same time. But we see the way that yoga preceded most of these major religions in practice as well as in ideology. Non-dualism is an idea that most of us are not familiar with. One of the best ways I have found to describe it comes not from the yogic tradition, nor from a religion, but from the book, My Stroke of Insight, by Jill Bolte Taylor. Its author is a neuroanatomist, a Harvard PhD, who studied the brain for years and focused on its functions. This diagram gives a simplistic view of what each hemisphere of the brain does. As she describes in the first chapters of her books, the left side of the brain is the one that gives us our mathematical, scientific, logical skills, helps us with our language skills as well. She says that it's logical and linear. It thrives on details. It differentiates, categorizes, sequences. Because of that sequencing, it needs time to identify past, present, and future. It's responsible for the mind chatter. It is the home of our ego center. It identifies self. My credentials, what's me, what's not me. Most of what comes into the left side of the brain filters in through the right side of the brain. The left side of the brain is the one we usually associate with creativity, art, imagination. As she describes early in the book, this is the side of our brain that's intuitive, creative, spontaneous. It harmonizes, integrates, fuses. It creates a master collage of individual details, a collage of what this moment is. We can think of it as a Polaroid camera. It looks at what is out there. Once we snap the shutter, that is fixed in time for all eternity and includes everything that's within our senses. It doesn't pick out details. It gives us everything, this collage of now. On the right side of the brain, no time exists other than the present. In this moment, everything and everyone is connected into a wholeness, a oneness, the sense of non-duality. So one morning while she's in the shower, she has a stroke. Jill Taylor knows exactly what is happening, where it is happening, and what will happen in the immediate and near future. And her book describes how she got herself out of danger into help and her traveling along the path to recovery. But as she struggled to move toward help, she describes how she feels. Mind you, she's losing activity on the left side of the brain. It's fogging out, but the right brain is still fully functional. And she says, I met a growing sense of peace. I felt enfolded by a blanket of tranquil euphoria, comforted by an expanding sense of grace, of being at one with the universe. I found I could no longer clearly discern the physical boundaries of where I began and where I ended. I no longer perceived myself as a whole object, separate from everything. Instead, I now blended in with the space and flow around me. And this is the idea of non-duality, of being one with everything else. Is non-duality plausible? Those of us who have participated, been members of Western religions, tend not to have much of an idea about the concept. I cannot say. But if we look at some of the things that are going in quantum mechanics these days, one of the things it says is that everything is probability until it's evaluated. It's only when we try to evaluate it, put human thought on top of it, that it makes it an actuality. There's a superstring theory in the science. It's still undergoing continual research, but it suggests the unifying principle that Einstein and Hawking and other scientists looked for. It reduces everything in the universe to vibrations, pure consciousness, hitting actual dimensions of which we know nothing, well beyond space and time. There's an entanglement theory that holds under certain circumstances, seemingly isolated particles are actually connected through space and time. There's a mathematical model out there called the integration information theory that infers that there is consciousness in all things, from the human brain to inanimate objects. In quantum mechanics, there are many things that defy our ordinary intuition and suggest greater connectivity with all that is, more than we sometimes profess. Now that we've developed a little understanding about non-duality, we'll talk about the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. They were compiled prior to 200 BCE, and they organized knowledge about yoga from older traditions. The date is approximate, might have been written earlier. Patanjali, although usually believed to be a single sage in the yogic tradition, may have actually been a group of wise people who gathered together to create this list. There are 195 sutras or threads. Those are adages, short sayings, much like you'd think of something like a commandment or the Beatitudes, sometimes full sentences, sometimes only phrases. The first one just says that this book is about yoga. The second one says Yoga Siddhi Vritti Narada. Yoga ceases the whirlpool of mind stuff. And that is generally the goal of yoga, to quiet the mind, to find peace and oneness. The sutras define the 8 limbs of yoga, and it states that each is equal to the others and necessary. Those 8 limbs are the yamas, the ethical rules, the way we interact with others, niyamas, observances and training, personal ways of working within yoga. The asanas are what most Americans are familiar with, the poses that we do in classes. Pranayama is sometimes done in classes as well, breath control, breathing exercises. Pratyahara is our sense withdrawal so that we can move inward. Dharana, dhyana, iterative steps of concentration, getting to a stage of meditation, and eventually so deeply within that we reach bliss, this connectedness, non-duality with all other things. Looking a little more deeply into the yamas and the niyamas. The yamas are the social restraints, the ethical rules, our way of interacting with others. Many of us know the nonviolence in thought, word, and deed from the example of Martin Luther King Jr. in a struggle for civil rights. I'm old enough to remember Mahatma Gandhi in a struggle for freedom of India from British colonial rule. Much of these are similar to the 10 Commandments that we know from the Abrahamic tradition. Truthfulness, absolute honesty. I promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Non-stealing. not only from others but from nature, and establishing priorities in our community as well as in our individual life. Continence, using our sexual energy to preserve our physical, mental, intellectual, and spiritual abilities. Non-greed, renouncing possessions. Thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not covet. The niyamas, on the other hand, are ways of self-discipline, internal observances, training, and study. Purity of mind, speech, body, one of the 7 heavenly virtues as opposed to the vices. Santosha is contentment as we are, not going outside for happiness. Tapas, austerity, to burn, to accept pain so that we purify ourselves. We adapt, adjust, accommodate to different situations. Study of spiritual books, we know from our biblical studies that we do, maybe in Sunday school. Some of us went to religious schools where we had religious education on a daily basis. Some of us still attend Bible study classes. And lastly, it's the self-surrender, being willing to give up that ego center of our brain. As we saw in a stroke of insight, that letting go of that left side dominance of the brain and getting into that sense of non-duality that comes from the right side. The asanas, the poses, are the part of yoga that are best known in the United States. However, they are only one of the 8 limbs of yoga. They were originally intended, are still intended, to facilitate the ability of the body and the mind to meditate for long periods of time, to reduce distractions so that a person can remain steady and comfortable. We did a little bit of breath control, pranayama, on the first part of this series. Those are the exercises, the techniques of breathing that help us focus inward through our conscious awareness of the breath, in the belief that the control of the breath leads to the control of the mind, allows us to quiet it. Pratyahara, the withdrawal of the senses, closes the gateways to externals, shutting off the things we would otherwise hear or taste or smell or feel, withdrawing from our senses. In the belief that when we have control of the physical body, through that sense withdrawal, through the consciousness of the breath, we are able to control our mind and get ready for deepening the yogic practice. These last 3 are heavily intertwined, more in degrees of concentration than they are separate features. The first one, concentration, is one in which Patanjali suggested that it's not easy for us to go from our usual activities to deep meditation, so he suggests that we go through this sequence of possibilities, starting first with something concrete. Maybe looking at a candle flame, maybe burning incense, maybe using counting beads. Whatever techniques helps us get out of that left side of the brain and into focusing inward. Once we are able to do that easily, we can move on to abstract thinking, maybe concentrating on something like love or peace. Once we get there, then we can start thinking about how to quiet the mind. Recognizing, as Deepak Chopra said, you are not your mind, you are the space between thoughts, not the thoughts. And that's where this is trying to go, to find who you are underneath all that thinking that's generated in the left side of your brain. And once you get sufficiently deep to that, then you transcend the mind. You get out of the thinking mode. You get into the sense of just being. And that leads us to meditation. It's the result of concentration. But it is usually an iterative process because we tend to lose focus. We can't stay with our attention totally for a long period of time on this sense of moving inward. Those of us who have practiced long enough, sufficiently able to develop the skills to quiet our mind, can get to this sense of non-duality, the sense of being that can only be felt in the silence of the soul. By now I've probably given you a headache with all this deep thought, so let's take a few minutes just to do some exercises that will help with headaches. What we see here are the common headache triggers that Tylenol has suggested. The ones in black, there isn't much that yoga can do anything about, but certainly the postures, when we do our alignment with our body, when we're standing in our mountain pose, our Tadasana, we're thinking about good posture, open shoulders, increasing our breathing capacity, our heart health, our lung capacity. That helps us with headaches. Obviously, yoga will combat the lack of physical activity because it is a physical activity. Through yoga, our eating and sleeping patterns are improved. We're more mindful. We're more rested. That concentrating on the breath helps a lot with falling asleep. The final relaxation, the breathing techniques all get us to a state where we can be more in tune with our body. And we talked a good bit in the first stage about what yoga does for reducing stress, alleviating depression, getting us to a sense of peace and confidence. So let's just sit up nice and tall, feet flat on the floor, and tune into our breath. We're going to start seated, sitting up nice and tall but comfortably, jaw slack, tongue relaxed, eyes soft. And we're going to start just with a massage of our face, bringing our fingertips together on our forehead, stretching around the outside underneath our arms, and then pulling our fingertips down toward our chin. Together overhead, circling the eyeballs and down. One more time. Especially if we have any sinus headache, this warming up will help a bit. And we're just going to circle around as we'd like, wherever we feel the most need. Rubbing our hands on our face to build up that warmth, relax the muscles. Then we'll do a little bit of massage to our shoulders and our neck. So we're going to take our left hand and bring it to our right shoulder, and we're going to squeeze the fingertips against the heel of the hand, really pressing especially up toward the neck, out toward the shoulder, and then maybe even down into the arm. Another time, same thing again. And if we're working on our own, we can go as many times as we'd like to help loosen up the muscles of the shoulders. We'll do the same thing on the opposite side, always balancing in yoga to do the same thing on each side. And again, if we'd like to come beyond the shoulder down into the arm, we can do that. We're trying to especially press in up around the neck, closer to the cervical spine. We're going to bring our fingertips to the back of our neck and make some small circles, working all the way up to the base of our skull. Dropping down again and making those circles around and around, coming up toward the base of our skull. And then dropping our fingertips low on our neck as we pull upward and stretch that back. And now we're going to drop our hands to our side, making sure we're sitting up nice and tall. We're going to bring our hands together at heart center, and then we're going to do our wing and our prayer. So we're going to open our arms wide to the side, but we're going to push our chest forward, really exaggerating the opening, taking a deep breath in, and then as we bring our hands together in prayer, letting our back round, dropping our chin, opening the arms wide, lifting chin up to the sky, pushing the heart forward, and bringing the hands together in the front, letting the back round gently. Deep breath in as we open, filling up the lungs and the heart. Coming back.
Doing some shoulder shrugs, lifting the shoulders together or one at a time if we prefer. Stretching through the upper back. And then doing some teeter-totter, one shoulder up, then the other. As one lifts, the opposite one drops. And some shoulder rolls, maybe just one shoulder at a time. Bringing it forward, back, down, and around, or maybe both together. Reversing direction. And then maybe doing some kayak shoulders, lifting the right, dropping the left. Moving those shoulders around in a circle like that, making sure that we're not rolling around and twisting the spine, that we're keeping the spine and the torso nice and tall and straight. Tilting our ear out toward our left shoulder. We're going to drop it as low as we can without letting the chin roll forward. We want to stretch a little bit more through the neck and the shoulder, so we're going to push our hand away to the side. If we'd like, we can take our hand up and over the top and pull that ear even lower down, so we're increasing the stretch down through the neck into the shoulder itself. We'll come back to center and switch to the opposite side. Dropping our ear down toward our shoulder. If we want to add the arm out to the side, we can do that, pushing hard to get more stretch, especially to the top of the shoulder. And if we'd like, hand over the top. Ear coming directly down into the shoulder, not pulling the head forward or back. And coming back to center. Chin out toward our right shoulder on our inhale, slowly coming back towards center. Moving to the opposite side. As soon as we're ready to inhale, we're going to turn our chin out toward our shoulder. When we're ready to exhale, regardless of how far we're turned, we're going to bring it back. We're trying to time the movement between breath, in and out, and movement of shoulder to the side and back. Now we're going to bring our hands to heart center again and press as hard as we can through our hands. We're going to tilt our head up as we follow the action of our hands high to the sky. Keep the head up as we open the arms out to the side, but then we're going to drop chin down to chest as we roll our palms down to the floor. Bring our hands together in heart center. Push strongly through the hands to strengthen the arms as we stretch high to the sky, arms opening, and then turning palms down as we drop chin into chest. Following the action with our eyes as we lift high. Opening wide, turning palms down, dropping chin into chest. Reaching up again. Opening wide, palms down. And then sitting up nice and tall. We're going to take a deep breath in. As we exhale, we're going to lift our arms up, elbows even with our shoulders. We're going to inhale and push the hands and the chin up to the sky. We're going to exhale, drop the chin into chest. Inhale, we're going to come open into our wing. Exhale, we're going to dive in the water. Really push our arms back behind us before we come and sit up tall, starting all over. Breath in, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale. Sitting tall, elbows even with shoulders. Chin and hands to the sky, chin to chest. Elbows to the side, diving into the water. Sitting up tall, elbows and shoulders. Stretching both to the sky, dropping chin to chest, elbows to the side, diving into the water, and back down again. And we're going to come around and stand so that we can place our hands on the chair. We're going into our cat and cow to help loosen up all the way up and down the spine into our neck. So we're going to start with our feet and our knees and our hips in alignment, nice straight back. Our hands are underneath our shoulders. And we're going to start the movement with the lowest part of the spine, pulling the belly up as far as we can, pulling the rib cage, really stretching the back before we drop our chin in toward our chest. Then we're going to move with the tailbone first, pushing it up and back as we let the belly drop down to the ground, let the rib cage lower. We're going to pull our elbows back to our side before we lift our chin. Always working from our sacral spine to our lumbar, thoracic, cervical spine. Just trying to work that spine like a wave. Building up that flexibility all the way up and down the back. Loosening up the tension in our shoulders and our neck. Doing this as many times as feels appropriate. And then we're going to come down into our thread the needle. So we're going to drop down on our elbows. We're going to keep our hips and our knees and our feet in alignment. We're going to pick up our toes, making sure we've got the weight well balanced between the ball and the heel of the foot. We're going to move our right hand a little bit further forward so we can turn our left palm up to the sky and bring it behind our right elbow. And we're going to do a twist, pulsing on our left hip. We're going to start rotating and pushing that hand as far as we can off the chair to the front, bringing our chin to look over our shoulder. If we want to, we can move with our breath, or we can hold the pose for a little more stretch, probably feeling it a bit diagonally from the top shoulder down across the back to the bottom hip. And then we'll come back to center, planting both elbows on the chair again. We'll go in the opposite direction so I don't have to turn my back to you. I'll come back to the same, but we always want to make sure that we do each side equally as well. So we think about hand behind elbow, pulsing on the hip first, then twisting through the belly, the rib cage hardest. We stretch that hand, pulling that shoulder as low as we can to the ground, maybe dropping our head to rest on the chair or keeping it lifted. And again, we can move with our breath, sliding it back, moving it forward. On our inhale, sliding it back on our exhale, or we can hold the pose. Then we're going to come back to center. We're going into our puppy dog. So we're going to keep our hips and our knees and our feet in alignment. We can do this best on the floor, being down on our knees, but we're not going down to the floor today, so we're just going to let our head drop down to the ground. We're going to push our hands as far forward as we can. Just letting them relax forward. Trying to feel the stretch through the lower back, but also through the shoulders. Then we're going to pull our elbows back a little bit so we can bring our hands in prayer position and bring our hands up over our head. Working a little bit more on that shoulders, loosening up the tension in them. And then dropping the hands down. We're going to go into a down dog to stretch all the way through the back and the shoulders. We're going to plant our hands on our chair, and we're going to keep walking back until we get a straight line from our hands by pushing our shoulders down in toward our toes, not letting there be a bend through the shoulder area. And again, keeping the alignment that we want from the feet up through the knees, into the hips. Picking up our toes, spreading them wide. Pushing back so far that we're feeling the stretch on the back of the hips, all the way down the back, into the shoulders and the arms. And then we'll come forward again and come to sit in our chair so we can do some twisting poses to help loosen up that tension in the spine and the upper back. We're going to think about twisting out toward the one side by pulsing the hip, rotating through the belly, the rib cage, the heart, turning out and putting our hand on the outside of the leg or the outside of the chair. Our other hand is going to come behind us. We might have to move a little bit further forward. We can either put it on the back of the chair or we can put it on the seat of the chair. But we'd like to get it as close to our midline as possible. The further we can move that hand toward the middle of our back, up and down, even with our spine, the more likely we are to get the shoulders turned far behind us. Getting a little bit more work through the shoulders. We're going to turn our chin to look out over our back shoulder. But then as we inhale, we're going to bring that chin back toward the center. Nice slow exhale as we bring it back behind us. Inhaling as we bring it forward. Gentle twist just to help loosen up a little bit more through the neck and the upper shoulders. Now we'll come back to center and twist to the opposite side. So pulsing on the opposite hip, rotating through the belly, getting the turn through the rib cage. Rotating around to the side, we can bring our hand to the outside of our leg or the outside of our chair, Our other hand can either plant toward the edge of the chair, but the closer we can get it to our midline, the more likely we are to get that turn through the upper portion of the body. We're going to bring our chin to look out over our shoulder behind us, and then working with our breath, bringing it forward and backward. Forward and back. And then slowly rotating forward.
There are some other things that you may occasionally run into in a yoga class. They're not integral to your practice of yoga, but just so you won't be too surprised when they come up. The first one are mudras. These are symbolic or ritual gestures. They have significance depending upon how the fingers are placed, how long you hold them, how many times you do them in one single repetition, how many times a day, how many days in a row. But they direct the flow of energy through the body for different purposes. We see some of them that are commonly used, the Varada Mudra, when you hang your hands down to either side, palms facing forward, thumbs toward the outside, a gesture of welcoming compassion. Dhyana Mudra, one hand on top of the other, thumbs touching. This is one that is often used in meditation, as is the one in the middle on the bottom where you hold your thumb into your index finger. This is also often called Chin Mudra. These are things that I might put up there with things like essential oils or astronomy. Maybe there's something to them. There are some people who are firmly convinced that they have efficacy. I've not found that to be true myself, but there are occasions when a yoga teacher feels we're honoring the tradition or it's meaningful to use one of the mudras. Most of us are aware that energy flows continually through our body. In yoga, the nadis are the names given to the conduits that carry that energy. The chakras are the connecting points on the midline of our body. And they translate as wheels, 7 centers of energy, said to control not only physical functioning, but emotional and mental states. In yoga, each has its own characteristics, and life is at its best when you optimize the health and balance in each. Some teachers like to emphasize this idea of chakras more than others, so you may find some who do different yoga poses that apply to each one of these to adjust any area that's out of balance. As you see, there's the solar plexus chakra, that's the seat of wisdom and power. You see the throat chakra, that's the seat of communication. So teachers may do specific different poses that help optimize. Chakras and related theories have been important in some of the traditions of yoga, but they're not directly related to mainstream yoga. I myself have seen no scientific evidence about the chakra system, but it is interesting to note that they correspond to the glandular and nerve centers in the body. So there may be something to this that has not yet been sufficiently investigated. These are some basic premises to keep in mind as you go through your yoga classes, whether you do them at home or in a studio. Focus your attention. A simple pose done with full attention is advanced yoga. That attention is more important than anything else. Doesn't matter how complex the pose is, how long you hold it. What matters is how much attention you give to it. Breath awareness is important in yoga. Most teachers will start warm-ups with coordinated breath and movement. But as we go along into the session, in held poses, the responsibility is more on your own. It's usually hard to give that attention because we're so focused on trying to get the pose right that we don't think about our breathing. But giving ourselves patience and time, that awareness increases with repetitive practice. We build foundations. We talked about this in part one about foundational feet, how important that is to getting it right so that the rest of the pose can be built from it. We've talked about the starfish hands. If we don't get a stable foundation, we don't get the best out of any pose. So we want to make sure we establish that first. Moving slowly in and out of poses is very important because when we do so, the muscles are much more relaxed. We're not in the fight or fight response. We have therefore a greater range of motion, and we are more readily able to identify that boundary of where our ability will take us to a point of pain or strain. Honor any suggestion of pain. Listen to your body when it whimpers so you don't have to hear it scream. Stop if you feel you are moving into a painful position. Modify the pose to something more comfortable or change the pose completely, or just rest for the duration of the pose. There is no shame to being wise and listening to your body. Practicing regularly is very important because it is the steadiness of the routine that produces results. If you attend yoga classes only sporadically, the benefits of yoga are minimized, sometimes barely noticeable. Shorter sessions 3 or 4 times a week or daily will maintain the strengthening and flexibility gains more than taking a single class once a week. Take personal responsibility. You are the only one who knows your physical history, your current health condition, your injuries, your surgeries, your therapies, body parts that are missing or body parts that are bionic. No yoga teacher can look at you and tell if you are ignoring pain. They cannot evaluate how intently you feel a stretch, how deeply you go into a pose, how long you hold it, whether or not you do the pose everybody else is doing or something different on your own, whether or not you choose to rest instead of doing the pose, is not only your responsibility, but your right at every moment in every class. And be patient. It may take months to reach your goals, but with consistent practice you will notice a significant difference. Both your body and your mind will change as you steadfastly continue doing your. These are some benefits that are particularly of interest these days, especially as we are now going through this time of the coronavirus. These are some poses that help boost our immunity. Yoga, we know, helps lower stress, especially those that compromise the immune system. We know that they condition the lungs and respiratory tract, releasing toxins in the body, improving the flow of blood to the organs. Chronic inflammation in the body is linked with health issues ranging from arthritis to diabetes. Regular yoga practice can help with all of this. Especially as we age, we should be concerned about bone density because that brings us to osteoporosis. Weight-bearing exercises are the best way to strengthen bones and help prevent that. In addition to that, yoga's ability to lower levels of cortisol may help keep calcium in the bones. Effective and safe stretches, including raising and rotating the shoulders, knee lifts, and ankle movements that pull the feet toward the body, are different poses that help build that bone strength. The warrior poses are great, any of the standing poses. Exercises that involved in bending forward or twisting out the weight would be blacklisted if you already have osteoporosis, because that can lead to an increased risk of a fragility fracture. So if you have osteopenia, the leading into osteoporosis or osteoporosis itself, Be very, very careful about moving slowly into poses so you do not aggravate that condition or cause an injury. Obesity and diabetes both become increasingly important considering the health conditions in the United States today. One of the recent reviews found that yoga was able to improve blood sugar control, cholesterol profiles, weight, lowers blood pressure, enhances lung function, mood, sleep, quality of life. These are all ways to combat diabetes, to keep ourselves healthier, find greater satisfaction in life. So let's do some yoga. We'll be doing some of the more standard poses, and we'll be doing them with blocks and bands where it's appropriate so that you can get a sense of whether or not you'd ever like to use those.
This is a yoga session, slightly shorter than most classes that you might take. But we are going to go through some of the most basic poses. We're going to use a strap at times so you can see whether or not you'd find it beneficial to you, or a block. When we use the block, there's 3 different positions. This is Papa Bear on the tallest side up and down. This is Mama Bear. And then Baby Bear when it's totally flat. So we'll be using them depending upon length of arms, tightness through the hips and the hamstrings, in whichever direction that you feel is best suited. But we're going to start, as we always do, making sure we've got that firm foundation through the feet, inner edges parallel. We can see our big toes, our knees and ankle are in alignment. We're thinking about pulling the shoulder blades up and stretching the spine as tall as we can before we roll our shoulder blades down and back. Chin parallel to the floor as we tune into our breath. Using that Durga Pranayama, the 3-part breath, breathing in through our nose, out through our nose. That motion like a wave with the belly coming and lifting, cresting as we lift through the rib cage, and then foaming as we come up to the chest before that wave rolls back down under the next incoming wave. Next time we inhale, we're going to slowly lift our chin up to the sky. And as we exhale, we're going to drop it down toward our chest. Just trying to get the kinks out of the back of the neck, the stiffness in the neck, the upper shoulders. As soon as we're ready to change our breath, we change the direction of the movement. Exhaling as we drop. This time as we lift our chin up, let's lift our shoulders as well, and coming into a big high shoulder shrug. And then as we push our chin down toward our chest, we'll drop our shoulders as low as we can. Now we're going to loosen up through the arms and the shoulders by moving our arms in all directions in something called the breath of joy. So we'll first flex our arms on our inhale, exhale as we abduct them out to either side, act up them back together, and then extend them behind us. Working with our breath nice and slow and steady. Together and back. If we want to lean forward a little bit to stretch more through the back when we extend our arms, we can do that. Flex, abduct, adduct, extend. And then we'll sit up tall. We'll just let our arms hang down to the side. We're going to do some side bends to start stretching the muscles through the side of the torso. We're going to lean over and push our hand hard to the floor as we start stretching our rib cage away from our hip, and then our shoulder away from our rib cage. Coming back towards center, switching to the opposite side. We want to add a little bit to this, get a little more stretch. We can take that arm and lift it up over the top, We have stiffness in the hands. We might even want to make a fist as we come back, opening fingers wide when we lift. We can put as much into this as we want to, depending upon where we feel the need to work on any given day. And then we'll take this to a spinal twist to loosen up through the back and get the stress out. Remembering, as we talked about in part 1, that we want to always pulse on the hip, rotate through the rib cage, and then bring the shoulder behind us. Exhale, coming back to center and working on the opposite side. So it's pulse on the hip. We work the core muscles to turn to the side, come back to center. Nice slow inhale as we turn and a gentle exhale as we come back. Corkscrew motion from the lowest part of the spine. And now working a little bit more through the legs and the hips, we're going to straighten out our leg. We're going to push through the heel so we can feel that work being done down at the bottom of the leg, around the calf, the heel of the foot. We're going to point our toes down to the floor, lift them up again, point them down to the floor, lift them up, pull them off toward our shoulder, push as hard as we can through the heel. And now we're going to see whether or not a band might help us. We're going to take it, we're going to bend our knees so we can gently put it around the sole of the foot. But now we're going to really pull back, bringing our toes closer toward our head, bringing our elbows tighter to our side, seeing if we can feel the difference on how tall the spine can get, how much work we can get up into the calf, as well as through the ankle. And we'll try the same thing on the opposite side. So first stretching out our leg, flexing the foot as we push through the heel, and then pointing our toes down to the floor. Just working a little bit on loosening up through the ankle, flexing the foot, trying to pull really hard with toes toward our head, pushing through the heel, leg as straight as we can get it. Now we're going to bend just enough so that we can get that band around the sole of the foot and try the same thing again. Holding onto the band tightly, pulling our elbows toward our side, and remembering that we don't need to buy a band. We can use anything that's convenient around the house, nothing with elasticity. And now we're going to try a little bit on swinging the leg in and out, our abduction and adduction. So we'll just leave our opposite foot on the floor. As we lift our leg, we're going to turn our toes out to the side. We're going to swing that leg out. Then we're going to turn our toes toward the inside and swing it back. We can try this again without the band and see if the range of motion changes. As we switch to the other foot, we'll try that. Turning the toes out, swinging the leg out, turning the toes back in so we're rotating through the hip. And we'll try that with the band. See if we can get a little bit more rotation and a little bit more lift. And then we'll come to a standing pose. We're going to put the band down for now and take our block. We're going to come into our mountain pose. And we know in our mountain pose that we want our feet parallel to each other. We want to feel the balls of the feet, the heels of the feet. We want to be able to pick up our toes. We want that straight line down our side, from our ear to our shoulder, to our hip, to our foot. And we're going to think about coming into a forward fold. We talked about these yesterday, that hip hinge, tighten ab, tighten quad, coming down. We're going to come just far enough to get our hands and our thighs. And then we're going to stand up tall. This time when we come down, we're going to hold the band and pop the bear. We're going to come down and see if we can reach all the way to the floor, putting that block down on the floor in front of us. If that feels comfortable with our fingertips just holding onto the block, seeing if we can get our palms of our hands on the top of the block. We work slowly into the pose to make sure that our muscles are most relaxed so we can maximize the flexibility, the range of motion. If we're comfortable now, we can go to mama bear, or maybe even baby bear, or maybe hands all the way down to the floor. And then we're going to make sure we bring our arms either up our legs or out to the side, that we don't pull our arms straight forward. As we come up into a standing pose, we're going to take the block with us. And we're going to put that block between our legs. We're going to tighten in, squeezing it between our legs. And we want to make sure that we're keeping this distance as we come into our chair pose. Because we want to make sure that we're not going to have the knees moving out, or we're not going to knock them together in the front. So we slowly squat down, lower and lower and lower. Bring our arms forward. We can come down as low as we'd like. But just making sure we keep the alignment. We're going to come up and stand up tall. We're going to do our camel pose. We're going to keep the block as it is, but this allows us to get a really good movement inward toward that block and then backward to help us on the flexibility through the hips as we place our hands as fists on the back. We're going to do that posterior tilt with the tailbone moving forward, iliac crest coming up, going from length through the front of the torso as we lift higher, higher, higher up to the sky. If we like, we can bring our arms up and out to the side, but we're always pushing upward, especially with the heart, solar plexus, so we're not sinking into the weakest parts of the spine. Squeezing that block, pushing it together and back behind us. And then we'll slowly come up and stand up tall. We're going to do a little bit more mobility now through the back. We can keep our chair on the side or turn it around toward the front, but we're going to plant our hands flat on the seat of the chair. We're going to stand so that our hips and our knees and our feet are in alignment. We want to be working on the flexibility through the back by going into our cat and cow, so we're going to think about working with the sacral part of the spine first. Tailbone moves down. The rest of that sacral spine, that iliac crest moves up. We start pushing our rib cage up toward the sky, rounding the back as high as we can before we draw our chin in toward our chest. Now we come with the sacral spine again, dropping belly to the ground, waistline dropping down, rib cage falling down, lastly lifting our chin. Lowest part of the spine again, sacral, rounding out, really pushing high to the sky. Sacral, lumbar, thoracic, cervical. Sacral, lumbar, thoracic, cervical. Really good exercise for anybody who has arthritis in the spine, anybody who has lower back problems, stiffness through the spine. And now doing a little bit more on loosening up through the hip joint, through the knees. We're going to be doing some sunbirds as we get ready to go into our standing poses. So we're going to start by stretching our leg behind us, lifting our chin in front, and then bending that knee, pulling it in toward our chest as we roll our chin in toward our knee. Stretching deeply behind us, curling into a ball. Stepping back and curling into a ball. Switching to the opposite leg. Long stretch as we inhale, tightening up as we exhale. We're going into our warrior poses. Technically, we can do these seated if we want to, but we get much more benefit on building up strength in the ankles, knees, and hips, building up our bone density if we do these from standing poses. We're going to use the block, and we're going to think about stepping our feet a comfortable distance apart. We're going to bend our front knee, maybe just a little, maybe a lot, but we make sure that that back foot's at an angle in the direction of our knee, that we keep our knee and ankle in alignment in the front. We can see the big toe beyond our knee. If not, we've pushed too far forward. We're straining through the front of the knee. We're going to put the block on the inside of our front foot. And we're going to think about turning our shoulders and hips so they're lining up with that invisible line between the heels of our feet, and lifting our arms forward and back without pulling forward or backward. Hips directly in alignment with the shoulders. Hands even with our shoulders if we can get them that high, but if we're feeling tense today, sore through the shoulders, we can always drop them lower. We can look out. Usual position is to look out beyond outstretched fingers of the front hand. Pressing as hard as we can into the heels and the balls of the feet, making sure we can lift the toes so that we feel well grounded across the entire bottom of the foot. Stretching more through the front side, we're going to lift our front hand high to the sky, going for height before we lean over toward the back. Working with our breath, trying to see if we can go lower and lower and lower, and then coming up. Into our Parsvakonasana, we're going to bring our forearm down and put it on our leg in the front. We don't want to sag into the pose. We want to be standing with shoulder, hip, knee, foot all in a straight line. Then we're just going to swing our arm up and over the top. Trying to really push those fingertips away from the heel, trying to get as much stretch as we can. Let's pull that shoulder a little bit farther away from the top of the rib cage. Rib cage a little bit further away from the hip. We're going to take our arm behind us to make sure that we don't drop our top shoulder down to the floor. And we're going to drop our front hand down, maybe putting it on Papa Bear, maybe coming down a little bit lower to put it on either Mama Bear or Baby Bear, but keeping that shoulder back. And now we're going to take this to our triangle. So we're going to take our block, and again, probably starting with Papa Bear, put it so it's toward the heel of the foot. We're going to straighten our front leg, push our hips back as far as we can. We want to get our spine parallel to the floor, and then we'll adjust the block as we need to, so we can straighten out our arm. We keep the shoulders stacked over each other before we bring that top hand up. We're not pulling it behind us, it's coming directly out of the shoulder. We get the shoulder in place first before we get the hand in place, so we keep the back protected. Thinking about using our core strength, abs, obliques, glutes, so we're not sagging into the pose. We're building up strength through the core. And then slowly standing up. We're going to take ourselves into a balancing pose before we switch to the opposite side. I'm balance challenged, so I'm going to move back to the wall so my hips are just barely touching for a little more stability. You might try doing this maybe holding on to the back of the chair with one hand or holding onto the wall with one hand. Doing whatever you need to best to get into a position where you get stability, to train the muscles to keep you in place, than it is to be wiggling all over. So we're going to keep our left foot planted on the floor. We're going to externally rotate our right leg as far as we can out to the side. Trying to push that knee back to the wall. Hands starting in heart center. And then when we're ready, we can lift that foot as high as we'd like up the leg. We can bring it so it's resting against the calf. Some of us may be able to get it so it's resting against the inner thigh, but we want to make sure wherever we have it that we don't have it pushing anywhere on the knee. So it's either totally and completely above the knee or it's down on the calf. And once we get ourselves aligned, we can bring our hands up overhead. Coming down, getting ready to do that on the opposite side. Important to hold the pose that we keep our core muscles engaged, keep the hips square, the shoulders squared to the front. We'll externally rotate the other legs. I prefer to start with my hands high because I'm so balance challenged, but it's usual to start with hands in prayer position or maybe out to the side for a little wiggle room. We lift our leg when we're ready, still thinking about working muscles on the outside of the hip to keep that knee moving directly to the side, and then maybe extending the branches of the tree overhead. As all yoga poses do, this has a Sanskrit name, it's called Vriksasana. And then we'll bring our hands down so that we can do our warrior poses on the opposite side. So we again would be sitting on the chair. If that's our choice, it would be trying to get our legs in the same position, but I find it really hard to get the back leg straight, but it would be stepping forward, with the opposite knee and straightening out our other leg. This is pretty hard. This is pretty much of a stretch. So if you're doing seated in a chair, you might need to put a bend of some sort in that back leg. But either way, we're going to be facing in the opposite direction as we were before. The front foot is directly forward. The back foot's turned at an angle. If we're standing on the mat, the heel would be at the back right-hand corner and the toe would be at the front on the opposite side. Bend in the knee again, wherever our body feels it can be. We can wiggle back and forth before we get where we think we want to be. We bring our shoulders and hips so they're lining up with that invisible line between our heels. We bring our arms out to either side. And again, we'll adjust. If it's too much stretch in the back leg, we can push back a little, step our feet a little closer together. And then our reverse wear. Hand high, going for height first before we slowly start leaning behind us. Trying to really get a good stretch at the front. And then coming forward. And of course I don't have the block where I want it to be, so excuse me for a minute while I get it. Taking that block and putting it on the inside of my front leg. As we come into our Parsvakonasana, Sanskrit name for this pose. Supporting ourselves with our forearm resting, but making sure we're not sagging into the pose. We're using the core strength to straighten out top side of the body before we bring our arm around. Stretching high. And then arm behind us, so we make sure that we keep the shoulders squared one over the other, that we don't start dropping that top shoulder. We're going to slowly move closer to the floor. Maybe wiggling that back foot back a little bit more so we can get more stretch. And now we're going into our triangle. So we probably want to move that block closer toward our heel, moving it a little back toward our midline. And we're going to push back with our hips as far as we can get them behind us. We're going to bring our head down till it's even with our hips. We have our spine parallel to the floor. We adjust the block as we need to. Alternative, if we don't have a block, is to put our hand on our leg for support. And then keeping shoulder stacked over shoulder, lifting the top hand up to the sky. And then bringing that hand down around, pressing into our feet, using our core strength, tightening our abdominals as we stand up tall. We'll step our feet together. And we'll come to a seated position. We're going to use the chair again, but those of us who wish to can do these just as easily seated on the floor. And we'll use the band again so that you can see whether or not this is something that would be useful to you. But we're going into Janusasana. So we're going to take our front leg and straighten it out. With the leg closest to the back of the chair, straighten it out as much as we can. But we'd like to try this first without the band. We're going to take the other leg, we're going to externally rotate it. If we have the heel planted on the floor, we can't do much rotation. So we're going to make sure that we pick up that heel. We're going to pull that heel as close as we can so that it's lining up with the inside of our straight leg. Really trying to work the muscles on the outside of the hip to get the knee turned to the side. We're going to take this to a forward fold. So we do the same hip hinge we always do. Abdominals down to quadriceps. And then we start reaching forward. We might want to take one hand and hold on to the chair so we make sure we don't slide off. Our hands will come down, maybe always resting on our thigh, maybe coming down to our shin or our ankle. Now we're going to try that same thing with the band. Pushing through the heel of the foot, lengthening through the spine, feeling how much longer we can get. And now we're gonna do our same hip hinge. We're gonna keep our elbows to our side. If we want to, we can hold on to the chair and just roll our hand around the band as we come down. But if we're feeling stable as we are, we'll walk one hand in front of the other, in front of the other. And remembering that moving slowly gives us the maximum range of motion. We're still working muscles on the outside of this hip, the bent leg, to keep that knee moving as far as we can away from our midline, so we maximize the stretch on the inner thigh, maximize the strengthening on the back. And then slowly sitting up. We're going to lift this leg, and again, we can do this without the band. Feeling the quadricep, hip flexor working, we can have our hands out to either side, or we might use the band and lift higher to see if we can get a little bit more stretch through the hamstring. Making sure we're not letting the back round. We're pulling the shoulder blades in toward our spine, that retraction and depression down toward our waistline before we drop our foot to the floor and take this to a twist. So we're still trying to maximize the turn of this front knee. We're going to pulse on the hip of the long leg, rotate around, and come and turn and look out over our opposite shoulder. Trying to get our hand lined up with our midline if we can, maybe even bringing that hand to the back of the chair as we turn out to the side. And we'll come back to center, and we'll switch to the opposite side. We can do this just as well seated forward. I am doing it out to the side just because I think it's a little easier for you to see. But we're going to take our opposite leg straight. We're going to externally rotate the other leg as much as we can. Again, trying to get that line of the heel of the bent leg foot as close as it can be toward the straight leg. We can do this hip hinge forward again, trying to see how far we can get down, how well we can keep our abdominals moving down toward a quad, or we can try it with the band. Most of us, at least when we're first doing yoga, haven't quite developed our full flexibility, find we can get much better range of motion if we use the band. Also a little bit easier to get that spine straight. And as we hinge, again, if we want to, we can take the hand of the long leg and hold on to the chair, or we can continue wrapping the hand around. An alternative way is to keep both hands on the band and just walk one in front of the other, in front of the other, in front of the other. But now working on the bent leg, the hip, can we pull that knee a little bit further away from our midline? Pushing hard through the heel of the straight leg is going to keep working muscles of the calf, around the ankle, the soleus tibialis, stretching through that Achilles tendon, building up strength in the arch of the foot. And then we'll slowly sit up. Take this to our Ardha Navasana, or half boat. We're going to lift that leg. We can do this without the band, just hands onto either side. If we want to continue to use the band, we can hold on to it with both hands and seeing if we can get a little bit more lift, a little bit more stretch. Our choice to make how we want to do this pose. As long as we don't round the shoulders, we keep that retraction and depression. And then slowly dropping that foot and doing our twist to the other side. Again, thinking about, we work through the belly first. Each inhale trying to get a little higher. So maybe taking our hand so that the heel of the hand is flat on the seat of the chair, pushing up. And then as we exhale, see if we can work pulsing a little harder on the hip, working a little harder through the obliques, getting a little more twist to the side. If we're feeling any tension in our neck, we can drop our chin down toward our chest, slowly swing it out toward our shoulder in the front, back to center, toward the back. then we'll bring both feet flat on the floor. We'll get ourselves well situated on the chair so that we have both sit bones on the ground. Our spine is nice and tall and straight. Hands resting comfortably on our lap, maybe turning the palms up. Joining thumb and index finger together, chin mudra, one of the mudras, hand gestures that's used for concentration. And just tuning into our breath, as we always do.
From Love Letter to the Earth by Thich Nhat Hanh. Quote, mindfulness is the continuous practice of touching deeply every moment of daily life. To be mindful is to be truly present with your body and your mind. To bring harmony to your intentions and actions. And to be in harmony with those around you. End quote. As we sit quietly in a comfortable position, we concentrate on the sensations of our body breathing. We pay attention to each breath but make no attempt to control it, mindful of the length and depth of each, not forcing it in any way. We may notice that our inhales become longer, our exhales more gentle over time. We watch the breath, we do not command it. Let's put our hands over our ears and concentrate on the sound of our breath moving in and out. Now let's drop our hands and move them to a comfortable position. Let us be mindful as we breathe of the action of our diaphragm, the major muscle of breathing, imagining it as a piston driving the movement of breath throughout our body. As we inhale, that piston pushes down to enable the lungs to inflate with a fresh supply of oxygen. When it does so, there's less room for the internal organs, so the belly, and to a lesser extent the ribs, move outward. As we exhale, the piston pushes up. Thus, the new supply of oxygen is driven through our cardiopulmonary system, providing that essential ingredient for functions within the body. When the diaphragm moves up, there is more room for the internal organs in the lower torso, so the belly moves back toward the spine. Let's move our hands to our ribs, placing them so that the fingers hug and the thumb is toward the back. We notice the movement of the ribs, the contraction and relaxation of the intercostal muscles, the secondary muscles of breathing that connect one rib to the next. Through our mindfulness, we see this activity in our mind, feel it in our body. Placing our fingers on the pulse of our wrist, we think about the benefits of our breath, mindful of the way oxygen is moved through our body with each beat. Blood that has had its oxygen removed comes through the superior or inferior vena cava into the right atria of the heart, then the right ventricle, moves through the pulmonary artery so it can pick up a fresh supply of oxygen in the lungs. It then moves to the left atria of the ventricle, pushes through the aorta to nourish the entire body, organs, glands, brains, helping to process glucose to enable muscle movement. The breath flows whether we give it our attention or not. This is all done by the autonomic nervous system, the control system that acts largely without our conscious awareness and regulates our bodily functions. We go through most of our day or life without being aware of the constancy of the signals that work between our mind and our body. But now we focus our total attention in that direction, tuning into the amazing activity in our body, the miracle of breath. Let us place our hands over our face, fingers on our forehead, heels of the hands on our chin, making a pocket for our breath. Now we can actually feel the exchange of breath. Let us feel the touch of breath and the movement of air current through our nostrils. Each inhale draws substance from outside ourselves: nitrogen, oxygen, argon, water vapor, particulates in the air. We intake the atmosphere of our planet, inhaling the unused oxygen of other living things, the oxygen produced by plants, particulates from processes, and inanimate objects. Each exhale adds our breath to the environment around us, increasing our connectivity to other humans, animals, to plants, notably providing them with carbon dioxide, to inanimate objects, those on our planet and beyond. Through our breath, we are connected to the universe, to all that is and all that ever was. Bringing our hands down again, let us consider cosmic energy, the primary essential energy found in all objects of the universe. It is often identified as the vital animating force in living things, often considered the standard of serenity, and is called by many names in different cultures: Chi in China, Ki in Japan, Prana in India, Mana in Polynesia, Ruach in Hebrew, Baraka in Islamic countries, the Force in Star Wars. We absorb Ki from the sun, the air, the ground. It is the absorption through our breath that we focus on that brings it into us. Ki energy is everywhere. It is the connective force of the universe, and there is a limitless supply. We do not exist, we do not breathe alone. We are interwoven into the fabric of the universe. As we are mindful of our breath, we gradually experience a quieting in the mind that we have not experienced before. Let us concentrate on the actions of our body as we breathe, mindful of the feelings and sensations of breathing, noticing the resonance of the breath within and without, using this concentration to center ourselves, finding freedom and peace. Slowly opening our eyes, let's bring our arms around to the outside and then high together overhead before we bring our palms together down to heart center. Namaste. Be happy, be well, do yoga.